Okay, so it's been a little while since my last video, and I think I finally have the respite now to actually make it. So we will go back into the MOS videos because they're a little bit less heavy, and it's nice to ease back into these things. But I will be doing the next top 10 video, which will probably be the top 10 bodyguards within the very near future to make up for my small absence in uploading content. So I will start setting up the next faction which we're going to have a look at, which I said was going to be Rohan. So we'll take a look at their roster for the time being, but I will get to the top 10 videos again very, very soon. But then again, I only have two, maybe three more of those I can actually do that are left until Reforged comes out anyway. But yeah, we'll get on to Rohan and Moss for now because they're worth having a look at because they have taken some pretty significant changes both because of the mechanics and because of new units. Okay, so I actually thought that I'd need to split this up into infantry and cavalry, but fortunately it seems we have the perfect fit. All of Rohan's units are able to fit on the roster, except for Siege, of course. So we'll start off at this end, and the Yawling Militia have made a return. Now again, this is pretty much the same story with any militia tier unit. You know, they have been given a buff to defense, so they will last longer in melee, but their very low damage means they're going to get less kills than they did before, which means they're not terribly useful in MOS because you're probably going to be wanting to use your better infantry. You're going to have the funds for it because again, Rohan are pretty affordable. So you're not really going to be using these guys unless you're in campaign, but you know, their survivability is something which can be useful. We have the Yawling Axemen. Now again, these guys are kind of a lower tier sort of basic men-at-arms unit. They are, you know, their defense again has been buffed, but I would say that these guys still aren't particularly fantastic. Like the problem in vanilla that Rohan always had was their infantry just wasn't good enough to go toe to toe with many other factions. The Orcs had a significant numbers advantage, which they were never really able to close, and in the quality fight against the other kingdoms of men, they were always found wanting, and these guys, it's a similar story again with the Yawling Axemen. And the Yawling Swordsmen to a slightly lesser extent. These guys were always a little bit better, and you were likely to see them in any Rohan army, but they're still not fantastic when you compare them to the higher tier units. Nonetheless, their defense buff does mean that they will at least hold their ground a little bit better. The Riddermark Axemen, however, are a unit which has seen a pretty significant buff, mainly due to the mechanics of the game where units tend to last longer, and that means two-handed infantry. Well, infantry with two-hander weapons tend to do a lot better, and the Riddermark Axemen were always pretty efficient, one of the better parts of Rohan's army. And this is no different here. In fact, it's even more true here because they can survive and dish out damage, which is very important in MOS. So the Riddermark Axemen are a very, very good unit to use. The Arid Lancers, the dismounted variant anyway, they are, again, pretty much the same. They're a very good unit. They still classify as heavy infantry, I believe, and not... Well, actually, no, they classify as spearmen now, which means they are actually what they were meant to be in vanilla, I believe. Because in vanilla, they classify as heavy infantry as opposed to spears. The only heavy infantry unit that can form Skiltron in vanilla, I believe. But here they are performing their, well, their natural role as spears, and that means they have a bonus to cav. But again, you know, spears, they're not pikes, but they will at least do a good job, and because they're very high defense score of spears in this mod means they are going to last a long time against a lot of infantry units. Got to be careful against two-hander infantry, but they will do a good job. And of course, the best infantry unit that you have, at least in terms of melee, is still the dismounted Royal Guard. You still form shield wall. If you put them into shield wall, they're going to last a long, long time. Again, maybe not quite so long as pikes or the elven spears, but they are still a very, very good unit. Again, it's a bit of a shame that they didn't get a nice sort of Rohirrim themed elite infantry unit, which is a heavy infantry unit. I think that would have really benefited them, but you know, maybe in Reforged we can look forward to such a thing. They do, however, have another melee infantry unit, and that is the Dwarven Warriors. Again, this is kind of like a low-tier dwarf unit. Well, maybe low tier is the wrong word. Mid-tier. Dwarves have these guys as well, and you know they're good, very good. In fact, you can probably use these instead of the Yawling Swordsmen, and they'll do a better job. But even so, you know, it's not going to go. If you're against the dwarves can field much more elite heavy infantry than you, which is going to hurt you in the long run. So, moving on to the archers. First of all, the Yawling archers. These guys were in vanilla, and their problem always was that they were significantly worse than most of the other basic archers of the Kingdoms of Men. That's true here as well. You know, they're not brilliant, to be honest with you. You know, archers have taken a bit of a nerf across the board, and these guys were already pretty poor. But, you know, if you wanted a cheap archer force in campaign, they would do a pretty decent job, but in multiplayer I would suggest these guys are going to get outclassed too easily. The Helmingars make a return. Now, oh no wait, here are Helmingars. They have very similar armour to the Yawling Archers. A little bit heavier, but the Helmingars were the best vanilla arch unit that Rohan had to offer, and honestly, that wasn't good enough because Rohan really struggled in a skirmish. They didn't have the numbers to deal with orc arrows, and they didn't have the quality to deal with human or elven arrows. They were really in a bit of a tight spot when it came to archers, and the Helmingars, while they were good, they weren't good enough to be like their highest tier arch unit. That is true here as well. They're a decent ranger unit, but again, nothing much has changed here in terms of the overall power that they can offer. But they now have the Royal Kinsman. Now, all of the Kingdoms of Men, aside from Dale, seem to have been given one really good high-tier archer unit. Arnor got the Hollow Steel Marksman, Gondor got the Citadel Guard Archers, and Rohan got these guys, the Royal Kinsmen, and they're all very high-tier archers, not as good as the Elves, obviously, but it gives them a real option at range, and I think that's the important thing here. Rohan finally have an archer force that is worth fearing, and I hope that these guys also make a return in Reforged, because Rohan badly needed those new archers. And of course they have the Bjornings. We've spoken about these guys before. Good, decent sort of lightly armored shock infantry. I've never seen them transform into bears before, but apparently it can happen. So it's worth saying. I would rather use the Riddermark Axemen though. Much more survivable. So moving on to the cavalry. First of all, we have the scouts. They make a return. Again, low tier cavalry. They don't have shields, so they're going to get carved apart by archers. You're not really going to be using these guys a lot outside of campaign. In multiplayer, you're going to want to field Rohan's best cavalry, so I'm just going to skim over these guys. One of their new units, however, the Riders of the Westfold. Now, I assume these guys are the replacements to the Riders of the Fold, which have been replaced by another unit. But at least in their namesake, the Riders of the Westfold are now melee cavalry, which means they will last pretty long in a sustained melee. If you wanted to entrap the enemy cavalry, this is probably your best option. Get them bogged down in a melee fight and then bring some spears over. You'll probably do very well for yourself there. Very nice axes as well. Pretty useful unit. Melee cavalry across all the Total Wars really is. It's not been as good as shock cavalry, but it does still have its place if you're playing defensively especially. So yeah, can be very useful to entrap enemy cavalry. We also have the Rohan Riders. Again, this is basically slightly better than the Scouts. They have shields, so they're slightly better against archers, and they are slightly better in terms of all their stats, so it's nice. The Rohan Bodyguards are essentially a dismounted Royal Guard unit with less in the unit, but individually they're more elite. This is a very standard issue thing. I would rather they have hit points instead of just being better individually in terms of stats. Hit points would really make the bodyguards worth using like they were in Medieval 2. But nonetheless, interesting. The heavy arid lancers, again, sort of like a little bit lower tier, I should say, than the mounted Royal Guard, but again, the charge bonus is all important, and their charge bonus is very, very impressive. So the the heavy arid lancers are going to do a very good job for you there. The Royal Guard, of course, monsters when you charge them in. Their charge score is extremely high still, and cavalry is even more important in MOS, I think, because as the fight drags on, if you find yourself losing it, you need to change something, and otherwise you'll be in a slow, inexorable slide to defeat. So shock cavalry can be the ideal tool to break you out of that, and the Rohan Royal Guard is, of course, extremely good at that. And they still have 3 heavy, horse archers. The Arid Horse Archers, of course, the lowest tier of their horse archers. I always find the Arid Horse Archers to be, very underpowered in vanilla simply because their missile score was so low. That is true here as well, but horse archers have the potential to be annoying no matter how high their missile score is. The mounted Royal Kinsmen are the replacements for the Riders of the Fold, and they are better because, of course, their missile score is high. Very interesting unit to use. I think that in campaign you would be very well served using Royal Kinsmen, although online, horse archers are going to depend greatly on how well you use them. And the Royal Kinsmen are one of the better horse archers in this mod though, so that's worth saying. And of course we have the Riddermark Skirmishers, which are the Javelin Cavalry. Again, even more important that you micro them well because of their lower range, and they're not as good in melee. They will suffer a lot of casualties, but they are potentially very, very damaging if you use them correctly. Just like in vanilla. So that is Rohan. They have some new units, and I think the mechanics changes have actually been kind to Rohan because it means they can actually survive longer and deploy their strengths more easily. They also have a few units which I hope to see in Reforged, particularly the dismounted and mounted Royal Kinsmen. I think they're an excellent addition. So, who to do next? Well, I said I wanted to save Mordor for last, and I probably will, but it'll be someone who isn't Mordor next, but my next video will be the top 10 bodyguards, as opposed to another MOS changes video. I just wanted to do this to get back into the swing of things. And yeah, I hope to see you for the next top 10 that I do.